A quiet afternoon at Thunderhaven Ranch, where wild Mustangs roam freely across the fields. But the peace is shattered when a ruthless biker roars in with his motorcycle. At first glance, he seems uninterested in anything but satisfying his twisted amusement, and when he spots a Mustang nearby, he kicks the horse without hesitation. What he doesn't know is that Joseph, the ranch owner, is watching everything unfold, and what happens next will make him pay a heavy price. Before continuing the story, tell me which city you're watching from. I want to know how far this video has come. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so I can send you exciting stories like this every day. The golden light of a late afternoon bathed the sprawling pastures of Thunderhaven Ranch, a sanctuary for Mustangs rescued from harsh conditions. The open field stretched endlessly, bordered by white fences and dotted with vibrant wildflowers. Horses of various colors roamed freely, their movements a harmonious dance against the backdrop of the countryside. Among them was a spirit, a black Mustang with a flowing mane and an undeniable presence. He was the heart of the ranch, a symbol of resilience and strength, his every movement exuding the wild freedom that defined him. Joseph, the ranch's owner, stood leaning against a wooden fence, his weathered hands gripping the rail as he watched Thunder canter across the field. A former rodeo champion, Joseph had traded the spotlight for the serenity of ranch life, dedicating himself to rescuing and rehabilitating Mustangs. Thunder was his first rescue, a horse he'd found emaciated and abandoned in the desert years ago. Through patience and care, Joseph had earned the stallion's trust, and their bond had become unbreakable. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Joseph's peaceful observation was interrupted by a distant rumble. At first it was faint, blending with the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind, but as the sound grew louder, its mechanical growl became unmistakable, a motorcycle tearing through the quiet countryside. Joseph straightened, his sharp eyes narrowing as he scanned the horizon. The motorcycle roared into view, its rider clad in black leather and dark sunglasses. The man exuded arrogance, his every movement deliberate as he steered the bike toward the ranch. Dust kicked up around him as he skidded to a halt near the outer fence. Without dismounting, the biker surveyed the scene, his smirk growing as he took in the idyllic surroundings. Joseph didn't move from his spot. He observed the biker from a distance, his instincts sharpening with unease. Something about the man's demeanor felt off, an air of disdain that clashed with the peaceful energy of the ranch. Thunder, curious and ever alert, trotted closer to the fence, his dark eyes fixed on the stranger. The biker finally dismounted, his heavy boots crunching against the gravel as he approached the fence. He leaned casually against it, his gaze locking onto Thunder. Joseph's unease deepened. There was something predatory in the way the man watched the Mustang, a gleam in his eyes that Joseph didn't trust. Thunder, unaware of the biker's intentions, stepped closer, his powerful frame moving with a mix of grace and curiosity. The other horses followed suit, maintaining a cautious distance, but sharing Thunder's interest in the newcomer. The biker's smirk widened as he reached out a hand, not to pet the horse, but to gauge how close Thunder would come. Joseph clenched his fists. His years of working with animals had taught him to recognize danger, and everything about this man screamed trouble. But before Joseph could act, the biker suddenly lifted his boot and delivered a sharp kick to Thunder's side. The sound of the impact echoed across the field, a cruel and unnecessary act that sent the Mustang reeling. The scene seemed to freeze for a moment. Thunder stumbled back, his proud stance faltering as pain and confusion filled his eyes. The other horses scattered, their instincts driving them away from the unexpected violence. The biker laughed, a cold, hollow sound that sent a wave of fury through Joseph. From his vantage point, Joseph's expression hardened. He stepped away from the fence, his mind racing with thoughts of what he had just witnessed. The biker, still laughing, turned toward his motorcycle, oblivious to the fact that Joseph had seen everything. But the ranch owner wasn't about to let this act of cruelty go unanswered. Joseph walked toward the barn with purposeful steps. He wasn't the kind of man to act impulsively, but he knew one thing for sure. This biker had just crossed the wrong person. What would Joseph do next? Joseph walked into the barn, his mind racing, but his demeanor calm. He wasn't a man prone to outbursts, but witnessing such blatant cruelty had ignited a fire within him. Thunder, The horse that represented everything Joseph had fought for had been hurt for no reason other than the biker's twisted sense of amusement. He couldn't let it slide, not just for Thunder, but for the principles he held dear. Inside the barn, Joseph grabbed his phone and called David, one of his ranch hands who lived nearby. David was young but dependable, a man who shared Joseph's passion for horses. Within minutes, David arrived, his dusty truck kicking up a small cloud as it pulled up to the barn. He stepped out, his brows furrowing when he saw Joseph's stern expression. "What's going on, boss?" David asked, his voice laced with concern. Joseph quickly explained what had happened. David's jaw clenched as he listened, his anger mirroring Joseph's. "What kind of person does that to a horse?" David muttered. "What do we do now?" Joseph glanced toward the field where Thunder stood, his proud posture returning despite the lingering pain. "We make sure he learns a lesson," Joseph said, "but not with anger. We do it with justice." Joseph had noticed something as the biker was leaving, a small sticker on the back of the motorcycle with the name of a local biker club. It wasn't much, but it was enough to track him down. With the help of some calls to people in town, Joseph confirmed the identity of the man, a drifter known for stirring up trouble wherever he went. His name was John, and his arrogance had earned him more than a few enemies. Back at the ranch, Joseph made his next move. He approached Thunder, who stood grazing near the fence as if trying to shake off the earlier incident. Joseph's gentle hand rested on the Mustang's powerful neck, his voice calm as he whispered reassurances. Thunder nickered softly in response, the bond between them unbroken. With David's help, Joseph loaded Thunder into the trailer. The other horses watched curiously as Joseph secured the Mustang, ensuring he was comfortable. David climbed into the driver's seat while Joseph settled in beside him, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The drive into town was quiet but charged with purpose. Joseph's plan wasn't about revenge, it was about confronting John and making him understand the gravity of his actions. As they neared the local biker bar where John was known to hang out, Joseph could feel the tension in the air. David parked the truck a short distance away, and the two men got out, leaving Thunder safely in the trailer. Joseph stepped into the bar, his presence commanding attention as he walked through the door. The dimly lit room was filled with chatter and the clinking of glasses, but the atmosphere shifted when John noticed him. The biker leaned back in his chair, his smirk returning as if he saw no reason to take Joseph seriously. Well, John drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. "Looks like the rancher wants to have a word." Joseph's expression remained calm, but his voice carried an edge of steel. "You hurt my horse," he said, each word deliberate and measured. The room fell silent, the other patrons sensing the tension. John shrugged, clearly unimpressed. "It's just a horse. What's the big deal?" Joseph took a step closer, his eyes locked onto John. "It's not just a horse, it's a living being. And what you did was cruel and unnecessary." "You don't walk away from something like that," John scoffed, his confidence unwavering. "What are you going to do about it, old man?" Joseph's lips curved into a small, determined smile. "You'll find out," he said, turning and walking out of the bar without another word. John laughed, but unease flickered in his eyes. What did Joseph have planned? The bar's raucous atmosphere returned as John shrugged off Joseph's words. His friends laughed, clinking their glasses, unaware of the storm brewing outside. Meanwhile, Joseph and David waited in the truck, watching the bar from a discreet distance. Joseph's calm demeanor masked the fire burning inside him. Thunder was more than a horse. He was family, and Joseph would not let this cruelty go unanswered. David glanced over at his boss, breaking the silence. "What's the plan, Joseph?" "You walked in there like a man with a purpose." Joseph tapped his fingers on the dashboard, his eyes fixed on the bar's door. "We let him think he's untouchable for a while," he said. "Then we remind him that actions have consequences." As they spoke, John and his friends stumbled out of the bar, their laughter carrying through the night. John swung a leg over his motorcycle, revving the engine as his friends shouted drunken goodbyes. Joseph's eyes narrowed as he started the truck. "Follow him," he told David, who nodded without question. The biker sped off into the night, unaware that Joseph and David were tailing him. John's reckless driving led them through winding country roads until he finally pulled into a rundown cabin near the edge of town. The property was littered with rusted vehicles and discarded junk, the dim light from the cabin's porch barely illuminating the mess. Joseph noted the location carefully before signaling David to turn back. Back at the ranch, Joseph and David discussed their next move. Joseph was a man of principles. He didn't believe in violence, but he did believe in justice. He needed John to understand the gravity of his actions, not just for Spirit, but for all creatures treated as less than they deserved. The next morning, Joseph walked out to the pasture where Thunder grazed peacefully with the herd. The Mustang's proud stance had returned, but Joseph could still see the faint bruise where John's boot had struck. As Joseph approached, Thunder nickered softly, nudging Joseph's hand with his muzzle. Joseph ran a hand along the horse's sleek coat, whispering, "We'll make this right, boy." Joseph's plan was simple yet powerful: show John the weight of his actions. Over the years, Joseph had cultivated a network of people who shared his passion for animals, veterinarians, rescue organizations, and even local law enforcement. He reached out to them, sharing the story of what had happened to Thunder. The response was immediate and supportive. Joseph also called in a favor from an old friend who worked as a reporter for the local news. By the end of the day, a camera crew arrived at the ranch. Joseph shared Thunder's story, his words measured but filled with emotion. "This isn't just about Thunder," Joseph said into the camera. "It's about respecting life, no matter how small or big, human or animal." The story aired that evening, spreading quickly through social media and local news outlets. The video of Joseph and Thunder, paired with the account of John's cruel acts, sparked outrage. Comments poured in, condemning the biker and praising Joseph for standing up for Thunder. The pressure was mounting, and Joseph knew it was only a matter of time before John realized his mistake. The following day, Joseph received a call from the sheriff. John had been pulled over for reckless driving, and the sheriff had seen the news report. "We had a chat," the sheriff said. "He's not as smug as he was yesterday. I think he's starting to get it." Joseph nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. "Good, but I want him to face the consequences properly. Can you bring him to the ranch? There's something he needs to see." As the sheriff agreed, Joseph walked back to the barn where Thunder stood waiting. He placed a hand on the Mustang's neck, looking into the horse's deep, intelligent eyes. "This isn't over yet," Joseph murmured, "but it will be soon." The sun hung high in the sky as the sheriff's truck rolled into the ranch, kicking up a small cloud of dust. In the back seat sat John, his sunglasses now resting on his lap, and his previously smug demeanor replaced by a mix of annoyance and unease. The news coverage and public backlash had hit him harder than he'd expected. The sheriff had made it clear. This was no small matter. Joseph stood by the barn, his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. Thunder grazed nearby, his sleek black coat shimmering under the midday sun. As the sheriff stepped out of the truck, Joseph nodded in greeting. John followed reluctantly, his movements slower, as though the weight of the situation had begun to settle on his shoulders. "I brought him." "Joseph," the sheriff said, giving John a firm look. "He's all yours within reason." Joseph approached the biker, his steady gaze locking onto John's. For a moment, neither man spoke, the tension between them palpable. Finally, Joseph broke the silence. "Do you know why you're here?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. John shrugged, his bravado attempting to resurface. "You're upset about your horse, I get it. It was just a dumb move, no big deal." Joseph's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "It's not just about the horse," he said. "It's about respect, for life, for responsibility, for the impact of our actions. What you did wasn't just a dumb move, it was cruel." John looked away, the words hitting harder than he wanted to admit. Joseph gestured towards Thunder, who stood a short distance away, watching the scene unfold with calm curiosity. "That's Thunder," Joseph continued. "He's not just a horse to me, he's a survivor. When I found him, he was starving and abandoned, left to die in the desert. I gave him a second chance, and he became the heart of this ranch, and you thought it was okay to hurt him." John glanced at the Mustang, noticing for the first time the quiet strength in the horse's posture. Thunder's large, intelligent eyes seemed to pierce through him, and for a moment, John felt something unfamiliar. Shame. Joseph turned and walked toward the barn, motioning for John to follow. Inside, the air was cool and filled with the soft sounds of horses shifting in their stalls. Joseph stopped in front of a small display on the wall, where framed photos told the story of Thunder's rescue and rehabilitation. One photo showed the emaciated horse Joseph had found in the desert, barely recognizable as the proud stallion grazing outside. "This is what Thunder looked like when I found him," Joseph said, pointing to the photo. John stared at the image, his cocky expression fading completely. "And this," Joseph added, gesturing to another photo of Thunder in full health, "is what he became. That's what kindness and effort can do." John shifted uncomfortably, the weight of his actions pressing down on him. "I didn't know," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. Joseph turned to face him, his gaze unwavering. "You didn't think. That's the problem, but you can fix it if you're willing to take responsibility." John frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Joseph stepped closer. "I want you to work here, spend time with these horses, see what it takes to care for them, and maybe, just maybe, you'll learn something about respect." John opened his mouth to protest, but Joseph cut him off. "Or, you can explain your actions to the judge. Your choice." John hesitated, his pride battling with the reality of his situation. Finally, he sighed and nodded. "Fine, I'll do it." Joseph nodded in return, his expression softening slightly. "Good. We start tomorrow." As John left the barn, Thunder approached him cautiously, his dark eyes studying the man who had hurt him. John froze, unsure of how to react. Would Thunder ever forgive him, or would this be the first step toward redemption? The morning sun cast a golden glow over Thunder Haven Ranch as John arrived for his first day of work. He had reluctantly agreed to Joseph's terms, though his usual swagger had all but disappeared. Dressed in borrowed boots and work gloves, he looked out of place but determined to face the consequences of his actions. Joseph greeted him with a nod, his expression neither harsh nor forgiving. "Today you're going to start where everyone else does. Cleaning the stalls," Joseph said, handing John a pitchfork and gesturing toward the barn. John muttered something under his breath but took the tool and headed inside. The smell hit him immediately, and he grimaced as he looked at the task ahead. He glanced at Joseph, expecting a smirk or a lecture, but the ranch owner simply watched him with a calm, expectant gaze. As John worked, he couldn't help but notice the horses watching him from their stalls. Their quiet, curious eyes followed his movements, and for the first time, he felt a pang of guilt for what he had done to Thunder. He remembered the Mustang's gaze after the kick, how it wasn't just pain but betrayal reflected in those deep, intelligent eyes. Later in the day, Joseph called John over to help brush Thunder. The black Mustang stood tall and proud in the pasture, his glossy coat shimmering under the sun. John hesitated, nervous about getting too close. "He won't hurt you," Joseph said, his voice steady, "but he remembers." John took the brush with shaky hands and approached Thunder cautiously. The Mustang's ears twitched, and he turned to look at John. For a moment, the man and horse stared at each other, the tension thick in the air. Slowly, John began to brush Thunder's coat, his movements unsure at first but growing steadier with each stroke. As the minutes passed, John felt something shift within him. Thunder didn't flinch or shy away. Instead, he stood still, allowing John to care for him. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental to John, who began to understand the depth of the bond between Joseph and his horses. The days turned into weeks, and John's responsibilities at the ranch grew. He fed the horses, repaired fences, and even learned to lead Thunder on walks around the pasture. Each task brought him closer to the animals he once dismissed as just horses. He began to see their personalities, their intelligence, and the trust they placed in the people who cared for them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Joseph invited John to sit with him on the porch overlooking the fields. Thunder grazed peacefully in the distance, his mane blowing gently in the breeze. "You've come a long way," Joseph said, breaking the silence. "But tell me, what did you learn?" John stared out at the field, his thoughts heavy. "I learned that they're not just animals," he said quietly. "They feel things. They trust us to take care of them. and we owe them that much." Joseph nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "That's a good start." The moment of reflection was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats. Thunder approached them, his dark eyes locked onto John. The Mustang came to a stop a few feet away, his gaze steady and unflinching. John stood unsure of what to do. "Go on," Joseph encouraged. John reached out hesitantly, his hands trembling as he placed it gently on Thunder's neck. The Mustang didn't move, allowing John to make the connection. For the first time, John felt something he hadn't expected: acceptance. Thunder seemed to sense the change in him, the remorse that had replaced arrogance. As Thunder nuzzled John's hand, the biker felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest. Was this the beginning of redemption, or just the first step toward earning forgiveness? The ranch was quiet, bathed in the soft light of dawn as John arrived for what he knew would be his last day. Over the weeks, his perspective had shifted entirely. Thunder Haven Ranch, once just a place of punishment in his eyes, had become a space of learning, reflection, and unexpected peace. John walked to the barn where Joseph was already tending to the horses. The older man looked up, his expression unreadable as always. "Morning," Joseph said simply. "Morning," John replied, his voice carrying a hint of humility that hadn't been there weeks before. Joseph handed John a halter and nodded toward Thunder, who stood grazing in the nearby pasture. "Let's see what you've really learned," he said. John hesitated, but only for a moment. He walked out to the field, halter in hand, his boots crunching softly against the dewy grass. Thunder lifted his head as John approached, his dark eyes watching the man intently. For a moment, John felt the familiar pang of guilt, but he pushed it aside. This was about trust, earning it, building it, and respecting it. "Hey, boy," John murmured as he reached Thunder. His tone was calm, his movements deliberate. Thunder didn't flinch or back away as John slipped the halter over his head. Instead, the Mustang stood still, his powerful frame radiating a quiet strength that John had come to admire. As John led Thunder back to the barn, he couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. It wasn't just about completing the task, it was about the journey, how far he had come from the arrogant man who had once kicked this very horse. Joseph watched silently as John returned with Thunder, his sharp eyes noticing every detail. When John secured the Mustang in the grooming station and began brushing his coat with steady, confident movements, Joseph finally spoke. "You've changed," he said. John paused, looking over at Joseph. "I didn't think I would," he admitted. "But this place, these horses, they taught me something." "And what's that?" Joseph asked, though he already knew the answer. "That they're not just animals," John said, his voice steady. I don't know how to explain it. They're like us in a lot of ways. They feel, they trust, and they deserve respect." Joseph nodded, his approval subtle but genuine. "That's what I hoped you'd learn." Later that day, Joseph gathered the ranch hands, including John, for a small celebration. Thunder stood in the center of the group, his glossy black coat gleaming in the sunlight. Joseph spoke briefly, his words carrying weight. "Thunder is a symbol of what this ranch stands for. Second chances, not just for horses, but for people too," Joseph said, glancing at John. "What you've done here isn't just about making up for a mistake. It's about proving that anyone can change if they choose to." John felt a lump in his throat as the ranch hands clapped and cheered. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of pride that wasn't tied to arrogance or bravado. It was real, earned, and deeply humbling. As the day wound down, John approached Joseph one last time. "Thank you," he said simply, "for giving me this chance, for not turning me in." Joseph studied him for a moment before responding. "I didn't do it for you," he said. "I did it for Thunder, and for every horse that's been treated like they don't matter, but you proved me right. You're not the same man who walked onto this ranch." John nodded, his jaw tight with emotion. "I'll do better," he promised. "I know you will," Joseph replied. Before John left, he walked out to the pasture one last time to say goodbye to Thunder. The Mustang approached him without hesitation, nuzzling his shoulder in a gesture of acceptance. John smiled, his hand resting on the horse's neck. "Thanks, buddy," John whispered, "for teaching me what I didn't even know I needed to learn." As John drove away from the ranch, the weight of his past actions still lingered, but so did a newfound sense of purpose. He wasn't just leaving Thunderhaven Ranch, he was leaving behind the man he used to be. If this story has touched your heart, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you never miss another inspiring and meaningful video. Our channel is dedicated to sharing profound stories of forgiveness, patience, and life lessons. Share this story to spread positive messages and help others discover these inspiring tales. Make sure to turn on notifications so you stay updated with our latest uploads. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.